All right, thanks everybody. Welcome to our final installment of our urban and small scale conservation planning training series, what we're calling 401, our technical specifications. I am Shannon Zizula, the state resource conservationist with NRCS here in Indiana, and it's a pleasure to be sharing this information with you today. We have a great training team that came out to deliver this material for you, and I know you're going to enjoy it. Again, just a bit of housekeeping. If you are not in the office, please turn off your VPN. That will make connections for everybody that much quicker and more robust. And then even especially, please interact with us. Chat, raise your hand. Let's keep this interactive. It's sometimes in this virtual world, we do a great job, but having that interaction is definitely a key to an enjoyable time. So we'll go ahead and get started here. First of all, the goal for today is the same as the other trainings. We want to have good conservation planning out there on these urban small scale farms, making sure that the conservation plan can support a program if that farmer is interested in our programs, and then helping get that conservation on the ground. As we've talked, there is no definition for urban farm. There is no definition for small scale or small farm. It's really where you can find these farms anywhere in Indiana, and that's where it's really important that all of us conservation planners understand these concepts and provide great quality customer service. Just as a reminder, as I mentioned, this is the fourth installment. We started way back in August of 2022.
Lord.
And then we went to with our getting customers started version. Then we talked about technical conservation planning in the early fall. Then we moved into programs at the beginning of this calendar year. And now today we are talking about technical specifications. As a reminder, recordings and materials are available through those Outlook invitations for each of these events, and each of these events in your Outlook calendar also have a link to a box site that all the resources, the PowerPoints, the recordings, all that is being stored there. So thanks a ton to all of our partners for helping catalog all this great material and making it available to you. As we also talked about in previous sessions, these are gaining national attention. A lot of states are wanting to do something very similar. We've shared our resources with those other states, and hopefully your counterparts across the nation will also be getting some great technical training and programmatic training as well. So first and foremost, to get us started, let's get a little bit chatty. Let's see how your interactive capabilities are working this morning. So that way we can troubleshoot when it really matters. So I'm going to ask just a couple questions. I want you to throw answers out there in the chat for me, and we'll see how this is working for us. So first and foremost, how many conservation planning visits have you made to urban and small scale farms this fiscal year? Just put a number in the chat of how many small scale farms you visited this year to do conservation planning on. Jennifer, I think you're monitoring the chat. If you shout out numbers, I'm just kind of interested to hear what people have been doing.
Sure. We've got quite a range. We've got a range from 0 to we've got several with 3, 4, a lot. So yeah, really runs the gamut. 6 to 10, I see one. So yeah, a lot of range.
Nice. Yeah, good. And again, these are clients, just like any other of our traditional or more familiar clients, if you will, the larger farms. So we're trying to do our best to make sure that we don't have any barriers out there for providing good quality customer service, and also knowing that you all as conservation planners may not be as familiar with some of these farming operations or how to talk about a conservation practice at this scale. So that's what these trainings are all about. And hopefully you're getting some good background knowledge through these trainings and putting it into action in your site business out there. Good to hear. Second question, how many equip applications at this scale have you processed this year? Throw that in the chat as well, please. Have we had any?
We have. We see. I'm just giving a second to let them populate. No, it's okay. I see Angie posts 9, Deb posts 7, Jalen posts 1, Sarah 2, Kellyanne 3, and then we kind of go, between 1 to 10. Thanks for chiming in, folks. But yeah, it looks like, again, definite interest out there.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. And again, it all starts with that conservation plan. And that's why we spent a good deal of time in person and others talking about conservation planning at this scale. And, you know, our programs are great for these small farmers, small scale farmers, but they don't have to be, our goal is not to push them into a program, right? It's just provide good quality technical assistance out there, get some good conservation at this scale. But it's great to hear that our programs are fitting the conservation needs on these farms as well. And finally, third question, of those EQIP applications, how many have been pre-approved so far? Probably not as many.
I was going to say your questions are getting trickier and trickier.
We're scaling down.
I see several folks popped in, one or two. Couple folks populated a higher number than that. Some have said 0. So again, variable amongst the offices.
Yeah. No, Katie shared the numbers so far with us, so we could kind of put this training together, kind of highlight the practices that we know have been pre-approved so far. And as we know, throughout all of our programs, the demand is much higher than the funding that we have. However, as you've heard Curtis and Katie talk about on our weekly calls, there's a lot of money on the horizon, right? So be prepared. And I think Curtis shared that we also received additional funding through headquarters for this fiscal year. And I think a lot of that funding is targeted toward these types of farms. So if you had EQIP applications in the hopper and they didn't get funded, don't get too relaxed, because chances are you'll be getting a positive notice from the state office that some of your applications are now funded. So that's good. All right.
Katie says more to come. So good news.
So if you felt like you didn't have to pay attention to today, rethink that, please, and do, because you might be putting these skills to the test here in the next short time period here. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate that interaction. Please keep that going throughout the day. As I mentioned, providing good quality training does not happen independently. There's a huge team. I can't thank everyone on this team enough. Our urban soil health partners played a huge key role. Our conservation partners out there, our field employees, and of course our state office employees. So you can see the list here. Everyone had a role, had a part in this. So many thanks to all of you. Great job. Looking forward to seeing it come to fruition today. And finally, here's our agenda. We're almost done with introductions, thank goodness, right? We're going to talk about cover crops. We're going to talk about mulching. And again, this is the technical specifications. We've already talked about conservation planning and some of these concepts in general, and even in our programs. Now it's time to help those farmers implement these practices. So they need the implementation requirements, or the designs, whatever we want to call them, job sheets, and the tools and the calculators that we've developed and our partners have developed with us, or for us, really. Really much appreciated. We're going to talk about these today. Getting into low tunnels, irrigation, crop rotations, tree and shrub plantings, composting, the wildlife tools, which Brian has already done a great job of covering that in past ones. We're going to highlight that. A little bit more on conservation desktop and other final products out there. And then finally, as we always have to remember, our conservation planning and programs do have to adhere to the environmental evaluations and the CPA 52. So we'll cover that as well. So with that, are there any questions for me before I move on? All right. With that, we will turn it over to Kevin, Allison, and team to talk about the cover crop calculator and cover crops in general. Take it away, Kevin.
Thanks, Shannon. Let me just get set up here. Can you see my slides okay?
We see your presentation, not necessarily presenter view, but now we do. Perfect.
Okay, great. All right, so let's jump into cover crops. So this is Cover Crop 401 training. My name is Kevin Allison with the Marion County Soil and Water Conservation District. So yeah, we're going to start with a document tour. So we've got some really cool new documents that will hopefully help planners, and as well as be grower friendly too, so they can use these tools themselves or alongside a planner. So there's an Excel calculator that is been created for small farms. As you know, INNRCS has a large scale ag calculator that can really fit, acres and pounds per acre. But when we're on a smaller scale, working in 500 square feet or 100 square feet, it's great to be able to scale that down to even a measurement such as ounces. So how many ounces of crimson clover, how many ounces of cereal rye would be working on that area. So within that Excel tool, there is a cover crop table, and that's kind of where it all starts. Then a creative mix, which pulls off of that table, and then the seeding windows that you've seen before. They're also work for small farms. And then we'll go through some technical PDFs, including a cover crop overview, seeding methods for small farms, a document from Virginia Association for Biological Farming using manually operated seeders for those folks using row seeders and push behinds, a cover crop termination document, and then a couple one-pagers. And then we'll do a demonstration of the creative mix, and then we'll have some interactivity. So maybe get your phones handy. We'll give you a QR code here in a little bit so you can join in. Okay, so to start off, and I'll show you the Excel calculator too, or this in Excel format as well. But I just wanted to give you an overview of what's within that Excel calculator. So like I said, it starts out with a table. These are all the cover crops pulled from the large calculator. Gives you the type, the life cycle, winter survival. So you can see barley is expected to survive. Buckwheat is never expected to survive the winter. You can also kind of gather that information in the termination methods column where it says freeze. So if you look down at oats, they seldom survive the winter. Yeah, we can definitely get some warm winters where in southern Indiana they just might survive, but usually they're expected to. So they seldom survive the winter. So yeah, you can kind of look at that. Then like tillage, I think almost any cover crop can be killed with tillage. Of course, there's some nuances to that. One of our documents about terminating cover crops goes into tillage to kill cover crops a little bit, but I'd almost refer people to the more robust managing cover crops profitably when they are looking to till a cover crop in, as that gives some nuances for each cover crop, such as, if cereal rye is less than 10 inches, it might regrow if you till it. So you might need to do multiple passes. There's also a mow and cut column. So when can you mow or cut this cover crop down, usually at flower, and expect to kill it. Same with crimping. We'll go over that a little bit more, but in general, can you crimp this cover crop? And in general, those would be the grasses. You can, I think Harry Vetch on this chart, for example, does say that you can crimp it. However, I think some of these measurements were pulled off of the Midwest Cover Crop Council data, and they might be thinking about a big roller crimper that weighs thousands of pounds. So when you're doing it by foot or with a T-post or a small crimper, sometimes legumes are very hard to crimp and kill. So there is a footnote at the bottom: crimping only may not fully terminate legumes. And then there's a tarp column. So tarping strategically, you can kill almost any cover crop. It's got the growth height. I think that's kind of important in the urban world. Some people want to be considerate of, there's lots of reasons why growth height would be important. But that's a measurement we've got there, and then seed in at maturity. Going on to the second page of the table, minimum germ temp, optimum depth, there's surface broadcast potential. So I guess I should mention too, you might see some question marks here and there. We are going to be getting MCCC data fairly soon, just to cross-check to see if there's going to be any updates on some of these attributes. But for example, flax was a new cover crop that was just entered into our calculator, and we don't have I didn't get the minimum germ temp for it yet, and the optimum depth, but slowly but surely we'll fill all those question marks in. So surface broadcast potential, if it's a positive, in general, it could be surface applied and still germinate and do okay. Of course, seed to soil contact is going to be best almost in any situation though. So those are just kind of just the potential for it to do okay. And usually those are small seeds as opposed to the large seeds that usually like to be buried to their optimum seeding depth. And then we got seeding rate. So you see a low, normal, and high, and that's really the foundation of the creative mix, which is the next step in this process. Those rates were pulled from the big INNRCS calculator for broadcast. So that was basically a normal So the normal rate would be 100% canopy cover. So if I did a cereal rye at 100%, that would be normal seeding rate. And I did bump that up by 20% for aerial seeding. So these are based on broadcast or aerial seedings. And I did that because I think there's not that big of a difference, but in general, a lot of our folks are seeding at higher rates. And that is it's just 20%. So I think these are good rates. Low is half a rate, half the normal rate. So 50% canopy is what you would expect. And then high is double rate. So if you were to do, basically times 2, right? Normal times 2, and you'll get the high rate. On the right, there's general guidelines for seeding rates and mixes. I'm going to zoom in on that a little bit because I think it's super important. I would encourage you to go through these with your growers, go through them yourselves multiple times. These were pulled off of the big calculator as well, but the story remains the same, right? Increased rates as you move towards a seeding method that is less assured of good seed to soil contacts. Increased rates of primary purposes weed control. So some documents will say, in organic systems, when we're really trying to get weed control, like multiply it by 2, so use high rates basically. So just trying to get, and some will even say 3 to 4. Some growers do 50, not recommend like 50 times the normal rate. Definitely not recommending that. That would get expensive. And I think that's why this tool is really, really good, because you can kind of lean towards, you can put high rates in it. It would give you a good solid rate where you're not actually, wasting seed, but you're still getting great coverage. Of course, as the optimum seeding window comes to an end, so you're getting late in September and you're still wanting to plant oats. If you were to plant the oats thicker, they'll get more soil coverage before they die. Let me see, just kind of skipping through. I think you guys can read these. Maybe that third one from the bottom is important. Certain species are highly competitive. So forage radishes, oats, sorghum, cinnamon grass, and cereal rye. So if you're using those in a blend where you want the other cover crops to be present and not get over shaded out or out competed, then keep those vigorous cover crop rates to a low, like a low or a half rate, right? And then maybe that bottom one's important too. Seeding rate for functionally redundant species can be reduced by the number of redundant species in the mix. It's kind of confusing, but I'll show you an example of that. But that's basically saying if you've got, 3, if you're wanting a high rate of legumes, and you've got 3 legumes, you can divide their rates by 3 if you want that family or that functional group of legumes to still be a high rate, but not seeding a massive amount of seed. We'll tease that out in examples. So moving on, this is what the creative mix will look like. Fairly simple. There's drop downs. So what you'll do is you'll just go into mix 1 and you'll drop down, oats, drop down peas, and then you'll choose the rate, put in the area. If you know the PLS or pure live seed percentage, you can put that in once you get the seed tags, or you could, call ahead to or do some research on the seed dealer and see if you can get that ahead of time. And then that will pop out the bulk rate per area. So per that 150 square feet, there's 3.5 ounces of oats and 3.3 ounces of field peas. If I had 5 beds, you could, of that same mix, you could put in 5 beds, and then it would pop out the total area in square feet and the total bulk rate per total area. So for those 5 beds on the far right, you'll be seeing, 1 pound, 1.3 ounces and 1 pound, 0.5 ounces. And then it gives you a total down here. And then some footnotes that will explain kind of what those rates are and some extra stuff. So this is the second page of that create a mix document. So this is the first page, and then the second page, it actually pulls over the cover crops that you've chosen. And this is just a helpful place to put what the planned planting method is. So there's a drop down that gives you 3 options: broadcast plus incorporation, or direct seed. So you can choose the planting method and then plan termination method. It's just really good to go through this with the grower so they know how to kill it. A lot of people plant cover crops and then forget the second part. We've got to manage them in the spring, and that's like the big part. So just keeping your eye on, having that conversation with the grower, making sure they know how it's going to be killed. Then a place where you could put your planned next crops. So those winter killed species are really good before setting up early spring vegetables. Another sheet on that creative mix tool, or the cover crop tool, will be the seeding windows. You've seen that before. Super important. There's also a secondary species sheet. So some growers new to cover crops are even experienced, and it's fine. Like they'll throw a lot of like old vegetable seeds into the mix. You know, extra anything they've got extra. Some folks might even think that like a thick carrots is technically a cover crop, but really when it comes to NRCS programs, like we really need to be using cover crops. And although they might add some of those extra features in there, like yeah, like what you can see, beets or faba beans, okra. Those really need to be like the secondary species. So this, you could still go through, make the cover crop recommendation. And then if they were adding species, you could use this sheet to, there's like a check box where you can select which of those minor species could be added to that mix. But it being a minor component. Okay, so let's go through some PDFs. That was the tool in a nutshell. We'll go through some PDFs and then I'll bring up that calculator. So I'm going to bring in. Okay, can you see that PDF okay?
We can.
Great. Okay, so there's 5 PDFs I'm going to try to go through fairly quickly. This is just a overview document. So there's, I think on the, yeah, for big scale ag, there's a cover crop tech note, like an IR for just kind of like a 2-pager to hand growers. I think this is a really good document to do that for small growers. It just basically says the purpose, talks about how they're great for soil health and organic matter, erosion control. Second page, just kind of goes through why cover crop. And it also has some note mentions the documents. I think we could probably get those to be hot links, but it mentions the documents that are important for, yeah, additional tech notes that could help a grower through all this. So yeah, it goes into nitrogen fixation, improving moisture efficiency, basically why cover crop. So that's document number 1. There's also a document on seeding methods. So you actually see this is from Dan Perkins' farm, this picture. It's really cool. He used a row seeder, which I'll show you in a couple pictures, but basically, yeah, did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 7 rows of cover crops down about a 3-foot wide bed. So second page is table of contents. These are linked, so you can move quicker through the document. So if you needed to go to the introduction, it'd take you right there. So yeah, kind of introduces what kind of seeding methods are available. So I mentioned broadcast seeding, broadcast with incorporation, and direct seeding are those methods that you'll actually see on the drop down in the create a mix. And then it just goes through, this document goes through those methods. So broadcast seeding, and with just a quick blurb about it, it goes into broadcast with incorporation. So basically broadcasting the seed and then incorporating it with a rake or a tool like a tilther or a power harrow, or a rotary cultivator. That's a very, very common way of doing it. There's also maybe even the more common way of doing it on our small farms and maybe bigger, like, market farms, where they'll use a row seeder to basically fill the hopper and just go up and down on that row, on that bed. So you can see on that bottom picture, I might zoom in just a little bit. That's a grower that likes to do one, or actually, yep.
Evan, I'm sorry. I just want to do a quick check before you go on.
Yep.
I seem to have lost your screen. Yeah, I was gonna say, I think some others are reporting that as well.
Okay. Okay. Okay, let me reshare. Thank you.
Sorry.
No, it's good. It's good.
And just as Kevin's getting that back up, Ellie dropped a item into the chat, a link for the Managing Cover Crops Profitably PDF. She says there's a link to get that for free, but also field offices should have a hard copy of this book. And if you don't, to contact Ellie to get one. You are back up and running, sir.
That is great. Okay, good news. Okay, yeah, so just, yeah, this grower used the oats on the sides, like 3 rows of oats, 1 on each end, and then rows of peas in the middle. Okay, so yeah, then it goes through some interseeding. It also goes through fertilization and legume inoculation. So this is just a really good document to just give an overview of seeding methods. Okay, moving on to the next document. There is a link in the seeding methods document. There's a link to this as well. And it is Virginia Biological Association's using manually operated seeders for precision cover crop plantings. And what this does is you can definitely use the cover crop table and seeding create a mix to figure out like how much seed to put on as a given area. But this is for those folks using row seeders, which was that kind of the thing with the little seeder with the hopper. This document gives some good indications of like how many pounds per acre you would expect depending on your row spacing. So I hope you can see this document right now, but it says, you know, at 12-inch spacing, vetches would be about 60 to 7 pounds. If you increase that or decrease that row spacing, the spacing between the rows to 6 inches, you're going to increase it to about like 120 pounds. And then it gives some recommendations on which plates to use. So that earthway seeder, for example, has different plates that you can put in depending on your seed size. So it actually even goes as far as to recommend which plate to use for those seedings. All right, the next document is the cover crop termination document. And this is a little bit longer document, but there's also a lot to terminating cover crops on the small scale. So it does have a index or table of contents here that's hot links. You can move through the document fairly easy, but I'm going to take you through somewhat quickly. There's an introduction to termination, and then it goes through basically all the strategies. So winter kill talks about biomass and what the bed might look like in the spring as things are decomposing. Talks about some nuances. There's sections on mowing and cutting as well as crimping. So shows some tools being used. Talks about the flowering time and how that's important. Crimping as well. It also talks about the timing for mowing, cutting, and crimping. So there's a little section on when is best to do that. So when it's flowering and pushing all its energy into production. And then also in our world, since a lot of our folks aren't spraying or terminating cover crops with chemicals, it's really important that we get them killed like mechanically or with other measures. So tarping is a big thing in small farms. So basically that's crimped or mowed, and then a tarp's placed upon it for a period of time. So it might be 4 weeks during the spring on top of cereal rye to make sure it's dead. And then the tarp comes off and the crop gets planted. But more on tarps and weed control. I just wanted to show you a brief overview, but also just encourage you to know that this exists so you can give it to growers and learn yourselves. Solarization, here's a page on solarization. It's where you would take clear plastic and kill the cover crop. It's more effective on like legumes and more tender crops, not necessarily something like cereal rye or annual ryegrass that might not be able to kill it that way. But in general, like some of the more tender crops can be killed this way after mowing. Talks about mulching up. So how to maybe kill a cover crop with mulch on a smaller scale. Let's say you don't have a tarp, you could add some mulch, cardboard even, to try to kill that cover crop. Just a little section on tillage. A little reference on chemicals, basically just referencing the HO50 document from Purdue about terminating cover crops successfully with herbicides. There's also a page on walk behind tractors. I would encourage you to follow that link and read the video or watch the video. It's residue, talks about soil moisture, allelopathy, and then at the very end, there's a terminating timing table so that basically you can kind of see when these things flower, each individual cover crop flowers, and maybe some strategies on how to kill that. So crimp and mow plus tarp, for example. Okay, moving forward, there's a couple one-pagers that we're working on too, and I think we'll just keep adding to these. But this is just a nice one-pager that you could potentially give a grower. This is how I use oats and field peas before early and mid-spring crops. And then there's another one on like oats and crimson clover and how I use that before kale and brassicas. So basically you're mowing it, you're mulching up, and then you're putting transplant holes in and transplanting the kale. Okay, now let's go to the tool.
Hey, Kevin.
Yes.
Before we switch gears, we did have a question come in.
Great.
Donovan was asking if you can kill annual ryegrass with a tarp.
Yeah, I think so, Don. I think you can almost kill anything with a tarp as long as it's left on like a certain amount of like the appropriate amount of time. So like a hairy vetch might die in 2 weeks. Cereal rye might die in, like, this is after crimping, right? Crimping or mowing. Cereal rye might die in 4 weeks. And I'm not sure exactly what that number is on annual ryegrass. My guess would be 4 to 5. It is vigorous. Agreed. But yeah, I think in over an extended period of time, you could kill it. And maybe that would be cool to have like an added feature, like if there was some more research on how long for each individual crop that needs. But of course, that's weather dependent. If it's cooler, it's going to take longer. If it's hotter, it's going to be quicker. So this is, if you can see this Excel sheet, this is the Excel sheet. There's 5 tabs on the bottom. There's the table, which we've seen and we'll go through and we went through, so we don't have to do that again. There's the create a mix, which I'll show you a little demonstration of. There's seed quantity and cost. So this will eventually be able to pull in how many, like, say you have like barley in three different mixes. This will be able to pull that barley, the cover crop, all the cover crops that were used throughout the mixes and give you like a total amount needed. So a grower might say, okay, got these 3 mixes, each of them has barley in it. How much total barley do I need to purchase? There's the seeding windows, and then there's the secondary mixes. So let's say I'm going to put in a little bit of mung beans, like you would put yes and put this in your file to note that there's an addition of one of these cover crops to the regular cover crop mix. So back to the fun part. This is the new create a mix. So I'll zoom in just a little bit. So basically what you do is you've got 3 mixes to choose from. They're drop downs. You can see all the cover crops on our list. One of the most common cover crops I've seen used is oats and field peas. So this is where it gets, I guess, like a mix of science and art. So how much rate do we want to actually put on this thing? So normal being a full rate at 100%, high being double, and low being half. I like oats to be, in this case, I want like a good mulch. Peas will decompose really quickly in the wintertime. I want that oat mulch to stick around. I also want really good weed suppression, so I'm going to put it at normal, if not high. The field peas, I could put them at low. I could put them at normal. I could put them at high. Like, I think kind of depends on like, cost versus, benefit. I think putting normal here is great. That's normal plus normal. This is actually a mix that is a double mix, right? Because you've got one species that's at 100% canopy. You've got another species at 100% canopy. So that's actually a ×2, like a double rate of cover crop stand. And I think we'll tease out this little bit more in the examples as we move through pictures. But I just want to show you the functionality. If you have your beds are 150 square feet, that's where it'll kick out the bulk rate. Let's say the oats came in at 90 PLS and the fields peas were at 85 PLS. Then it would give you a more accurate bulk rate of how much actual seed you need. Let's say we're doing 10 of those beds in this garden, and it'll kick out the total area and it'll kick out the pounds, total amount of seed that you actually need. You could then move over here to the seeding plan methods. A lot of folks will broadcast and just incorporate this. So let's say we do that, and we could just leave it at that. But let's also think that some folks might broadcast those oats out, and then they'll put the peas in their seed because the peas need to be deeper. They'll put the peas in that row seeder, and they'll actually direct seed it. So you could choose one thing, or you could choose a couple, depending on what the grower might actually do. Those winter kill, so you can see the drop down. We've got all those termination methods that were referenced in the PDF. So winter kill, and let's say we're doing carrots before there. So this would be a cover crop mix that you could then print out, take to the field. You know how many ounces you need to weigh out, and you're good to go. If you need to make another mix, let's say we're wanting a high biomass mix that's going to survive the wintertime. let's go cereal rye and mix it with crimson clover and hairy vetch. That's another common one. All right, so I want that the hairy vetch and the crimson clover to really shine through in the spring. I don't want it to be shaded out by cereal rye. So I could put this cereal rye at low, and then I really want like a thick legume. So I'm going to put those legumes at high. So the functional group of legumes is going to be high. It's a double rate. However, there's two species. There's two legumes. So you can put 2 for each of those. You can use a divisor of 2, and that'll cut it in half. Basically divide by that divisor to get the final seeding rate. And the square foot. There you go. For some, like if I really wanted biomass in this, let's say like I want that cereal rye to really get thick, and still have the legumes like thick as well for like just good weed suppression, then I might actually move that up to normal. So then you've got like a full rate of winter cereal rye plus legumes coming through. So that's the creative mix in a nutshell. And I think we'll go through some examples and play a little game so we can kind of show you what these might look like. All right.
Kevin.
Yep.
I'm sorry. We did have a few more questions come in, if you don't mind, before we switch gears.
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. Let's see here. Don has the follow-up question. He asks, would you use oats in a majority of mixes, or when would you not want to use oats? And then we have one more question.
Yeah, I think like oats, you can't really go wrong with oats. Like they're I think a lot of folks are, especially beginning folks and even advanced folks, are more comfortable with cover crops that die during the wintertime. So if you've got a mix like oats and field peas, or oats, field peas, and radish, like it's going to die. It's easy. You can even do just straight oats to start out. But yeah, I think like even for like a cereal rye mix, that's you've got rye coming, like you want the rye to really come through in the spring and grow. Like I don't think it's going to hurt to put a low rate of oats in that mix in the fall, just to have more diversity. So think of it just like your big farms, Don, like how to get the most diversity, but still have the right mix, like the right effective stand for how you're going to be planting the following year.
Appreciate that. Have one more question, and then we also had a comment.
Yep.
Let's see. Jason Connor had asked, is bindweed actually a type of morning glory or just similar? Kara actually answered and said, yep, it is in the morning glory family. So thank you for that. And then a comment/question from Allison Shove asking, she says, I know sometimes growers have a hard time finding small quantities of these cover crops. Will any of these documents have resources of where to purchase and/or what is the cost range?
Yeah, I know like the USDA can't really like give recommendations on where to buy these things. I think like the Marion County SWC, well, I guess we can give recommendations, right? If we have every, do our due diligence in scanning them all and getting a good list. So there is one started on the Marion County SWCD website under soil health, the soil health guide. So the soil health tab, there's like a cover crop seed suppliers. So I've started a list of, online places online that you can get them. And then also just recommend people check in their local co-ops to see if they're able to break down like bigger bags into smaller bags. But some will, some won't, but the online retailers are getting better about doing small quantities. Thank you.
Appreciate that. And yeah, we'll hold for now and let you go ahead into the exercise.
Okay. All right. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. All right. So we're going to play not necessarily Wheel of Fortune, but I thought this was pretty cool. So maybe get your phones ready, and I'm going to have you scan this QR code, and it's going to take you to a quiz. And what we'll do is you'll just kind of follow along as I move through the slides, and the object of this game is to guess the right rate of the cover crop. So I'm going to show you a picture of a cover crops mix. I'm going to tell you what the species are, and then you'll just choose what you think the rate might be. There's no real wrong answer for real. So just just do your best on what you think that rate might be.
And if you cannot access your phone for the QR code, I just dropped a link in the chat to be able to do it from your computer as well.
Thanks, Amanda. And then what we'll do is we'll go back through them again and just kind of have a little discussion on on what we all thought the rate was, and yeah, some considerations there. All right, I'm going to go ahead. I hope that's okay. I think Amanda did put the link in the chat, so if you didn't grab this one, it should be in the chat. Okay, so the first one, cereal rye and radish. What do you think the rate would be? And I believe that the quiz will give you the option to choose what you think the rate is for the cereal rye as well as the radish. Should have had some like game show sound. I'm gonna move on to the next one. If I'm going too fast, let me know. So the second question would be oats and radish. It's actually a cover crop mix that was broadcast underneath kale in about September. Those little notches on the kale stems is where the leaf is harvested, usually from the bottom up. Okay. Number 3, oats and field peas. This looks to be broadcast as well. This is a mix that will die during the wintertime. Really, really common. Moving to the next one. I think there's 11, just to let you know. It's oats and hairy vetch in a raised bed. I really like this mix ahead of sweet corn or popcorn. I usually don't use rye in those going into sweet corn just because it's hard to seed through, like because I'm usually seeding corn the row seeder or even by hand with like so it's kind of hard to make furrows through thick rye. So this will give you the nitrogen, but also kind of make a bed that's easy to seed through. Next, oats, radish, crimson clover. So you have 3 options there to choose from or to put the rate for. So the oats have died. It's probably winter time. Looks like the radishes are still holding on. Probably will die fairly shortly after this. And then the crimson clover should survive into the spring and then bloom in like April or early May. Next, oats and crimson clover. So the big picture is what it looks like in the fall. The top picture or the circular picture is what it looks like in the spring after the oats had died. Again, no wrong answer. Like if you can't decide between 2, just go with your gut. Oats and crimson clover. This is a funny one. My daughter probably seeded this. I'm going to blame it on my daughter. That's a lot of seed. So that's oats and crimson clover. And maybe a disclaimer. These aren't necessarily like this one in particular. I wouldn't necessarily advise using these kinds of rates for this cover crop. The goal here was to have the crimson clover survive into the springtime, but these oats were seeded so thickly that they actually outshaded the crimson clover. And I don't think much crimson legume survived into the wintertime. That's kind of why I put this picture in here. So keeping that oats towards a low rate would probably help let that crimson clover come through in the spring. Okay, number 8 is cereal rye. I think this is at the Master Gardener demonstration garden at the State Fair. It's to be broadcast and probably incorporated. So the next one, cereal rye and crimson clover. It's hard to see how much clover might actually be in there. This grower in the spring crimps it down with that tool. It's like a T-post foot stomper, where one person would be on each edge of that end of it, and they'd like walk down the bed, one on one side, one on the other side of the bed in unison, using that T-post to stomp over the cereal rye. It would then get tarped for about a few weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, tarp removed, and then planted into. Right, there's oats, field peas, and hairy vetch. I think this is a spring mix. Yeah, I believe this is spring. You think the rates might be on that one? And the final one is buckwheat. So this is a summer cover crop. Used often like after something gets harvested in early spring, with early vegetables, is like a kind of just to fill the gap in summertime. Man, if you could maybe start looking at the results. That is the last question we've got. So before going through the results, I just wanted to show you like a couple more pictures of the row seeder. So that's this is a bed that's been row seeded or seeded with a row seeder. There's another example. So not necessarily need to guess the rates on those, but those folks probably use that Virginia document to know which seed plates to use and spacing.
Kevin,
Yes.
before we go to take a look at the results, I did have a question pop in. Tim Schwipps asks, what is the difference between solarization and tarping?
Yeah, tarping is when you like another word for it would be occultation, to not to confuse things more, but it's basically blocking the light. So the black tarp is going to block the light to kill something. It would take a little bit longer, so thinking like 3 to 4 weeks. In cooler weather and warmer weather, maybe 2 weeks. But it's basically just to block the light. It does warm up the bed a little bit, potentially sometimes, but that's the idea. Whereas solarization is using clear plastic to intensify the heat. So you would mow like oats and field peas or oats and crimson clover in the spring, and then or whenever, and then you would put that clear plastic on, and it would just make it really hot and actually like use the heat to kill the plants. There are some, like in that document talks about this, but there's some soil health, be careful with soil health, I guess. If you left that on there for 14 days or even sometimes less, if it's really, really hot, like you'll be killing microbes in the soil. But it is a way that folks are killing some cover crops. So that's the difference in general. Okay, so now we're gonna go through the results. So Amanda, what folks have for cereal rye and radish?
So it looks like the most common answer for that mix was cereal rye at a normal rate and radish at a normal rate.
Okay. Yeah, again, no wrong answer. I think my gut here would be almost cereal rye at high. Like it looks thick for sure. I could see the cereal rye looking a little bit more scarce, just a tad bit. And maybe I think sometimes our like that 100% canopy rate normal, almost try to like think about what it would look like when the cover crop is fully grown. I think that's our kind of our standard there is like what is the cover crop is full canopy at maturity. Is I think I'm saying that right. So this is almost full canopy when it's 6 weeks old, right? So it's a really pretty thick cereal rye. And then those radishes, I could see that being normal or maybe even low. Yeah, probably one of the two. So good. So that's what this mix might look like on the cover crop create a mix. So for example, the rye is high, the radish is low. It was about a 75 square foot bed. So that's the amount of seed that you would need to put on. Right. How about oats and radish?
So the most popular answers were oats at a low rate and radish at a high rate.
I would agree. Yeah, I would agree. Not my, I think like not my favorite mix because there's going to be like in February, those radishes are going to decompose really quickly. And there's not going to be much oats left to like really provide some mulch. So yeah, this would leave a more bare bed in the spring than if you were to reverse that and actually do like a high oats or a low radish. But still, yeah, still good coverage and yeah, better than a bare soil for sure. That's what that might look like. So you could put in mix 2, right? There's mix 2, the oats and the radishes, low rate, high rate, square footage, and you get your seeding rates. All right. How about the third one, Amanda? Oats and field peas.
The oats high and field peas low.
Agreed. Yeah. So here's something about this too. Like, maybe those field peas were normal, but they just got choked out by the high oats, right? So kind of think through those things too. I still like this mix. Like it gives you've got great coverage, but if you're wanting a little bit more legumes and more diversity in the mix, maybe a normal rate of oats instead of high would let those peas kind of have their chance. Yeah, so there's that third mix there, oats and field peas. Or whoops, I put winter pea. Those were actually field peas. But yeah, oats and field peas, and you get your rate. And maybe just another slide to show what that second page of that document would look like. So you could actually put in, how they planted it and the possible termination methods. So you can see the second and third mixes are winter killed. And the first mix, it's cereal rye. So this grower would plan to crimp and tarp it. You could put in tillage if they were going to till, or chemical if they were going to use chemicals. But this kind of just helps guide the grower into planning for spring. All right, how about number 4?
Let's see, oats normal,
Yep.
hairy vetch normal.
Yeah, I think I'd believe that. I might think that this hairy vetch is actually maybe high. It looks like there's some really thick coverage there. But yeah, I would agree with that. All right, how about number 5, oats, radish, and crimson clover?
Okay, it looks like we thought oats were normal. Radishes were normal or low. They are tied. And crimson clover was normal.
I'd agree. Might say the cover or the oats are low, potentially. Like if you kind of just made the other crops disappear, like would that oats make a full stand? Would it make a 100% canopy? So maybe not. So it might actually be at low. But I'd agree that the radish is probably low and maybe the crimson clover is at normal. That's a good mix. Okay, number 6, oats and crimson clover.
Oats normal, and it is a dead tie between normal and high on the crimson clover.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah, it's probably high. That's looks thick. Yeah, even if that were less, if there was less clover, on the soil surface, like coverage, like when those get fuller, when they're actually, pushing towards maturity, like that's definitely going to close out the canopy. All right, number 7, oats and crimson clover.
Oats high and crimson clover low.
Yeah, like oats are definitely high, and honestly, who knows what the crimson clover is because it got buried. Like, so it doesn't really even matter. Like, it wouldn't matter, right? Like, this is not like if you're actually wanting to, get your money's worth out of the crimson clover, I would have put those oats down to normal or low to let that clover have a chance. So yeah. Number 8, cereal rye.
Normal rate.
Yeah, I agree with that. Or high, maybe high. It looks thick. So yeah, that's but good coverage, right? Like good soil coverage. There's not a lot of room for weeds to pop through there. So rye and crimson clover?
Cereal rye normal and crimson clover normal.
Cool. I believe it. So yeah, good solid mix. So actually that's, that's in a sense, you've got two normals, so that's actually a double rate of cover crops. But yeah, so good weed suppression, yeah, beneficial. All right, that's what that might look like on the Create a Mix. Okay, couple more to go. Oats, field peas, and hairy vetch.
So everybody thought the oats were low, the field peas were low, and the hairy vetch was low.
Yeah, agreed. So this is just I wanted to show you this, a few ways of entering, like that could be entered into the Create a Mix. You can see that top mix, that's exactly what you said, right? Low, low, low. That second one gets you the exact same numbers, but it's basically oats, are low, and then field peas, like the legume component, the field peas and the hairy vetch are at a normal, but they use the divisor of 2. So really, you wanted like a normal kind of full rate of legume, but since you've got 2 species, you would divide by 2 because they both add up to make the legume functionality. So that actually gets you the same results. If you were to think like, if you were to want even less legumes as a part of that mix, you could even put them both at low and then divide by 2, use the divisor of 2, and that would actually make them almost like a quarter mix, like a 25% rate. So just a few things you can do with the calculator to kind of tease out what you want. But in general, I'd say either of these would work. Okay, last one is buckwheat.
Everybody thought that was at a normal rate. That's almost 100%.
Okay, yeah, I would say normal or high. Yeah, I believe it. All right, well, good job, everyone. I think I hope that helps like kind of visualize what a cover crop might look like, and then how to use the rate kind of based on what you want it to look like. So there's the table, and I think that's it. So if there's any questions, please let me know. That's actually Jared Jeffries, former Indiana University basketball star, fulfilling his lifelong dream of winning on Price is Right, which I think is pretty cool. Yeah, any questions, let me know.
Nice. Thanks so much for that, Kevin. Really appreciate that little test of our knowledge. We did have a comment that came in just kind of pointing out that, of course, the seeding method can impact what a seeding looks like, whether it's broadcast or drilled. So just to keep that in mind as well. I did see a hand pop up, but then it went back down. Was there someone who wanted to ask a question on the audio line? All right, maybe not. Any other questions? All right. Well, again, appreciate that, Kevin. And I think now on our agenda, we have a spot blocked out for break. So I think we'll go ahead and take, I think we planned for a 10-minute break. So we can go ahead and take that. And I'll put a timer up here so that we know when to come back. But yeah, we'll take a stretch break and plan to come back in 10 minutes. All right, folks. Hopefully you got a chance to get up and stretch a little bit. We'll go ahead and keep going with the agenda today, and I'll turn it over to Ellie.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Just making sure that you can see the right screen. Looks full screen?
Not yet. We see the other one. There we go. Perfect.
All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Ellie Blaine, and I'm the director of the Urban Soil Health Program, and I'll be flowing through mulching and talking about a new calculator and tool that you can use for planning. I just want to start out by saying again how important a lot of different natural mulches are on small scale farms for keeping the soil covered and have an integral role in building soil health on small farms. And there's a wide applicability, as I said, of natural materials, straw, compost, wood chips, and we'll talk a little bit about location and how that fits into the overall farm. So as a refresher, again, mulches can be used throughout the farm. So on planting beds, as you see in the far left here with garlic, with straw, both walkways and pathways. So this grower in the middle left is using newsprint roll that is unprinted, and then building up those walkways with straw to have between growing rows. You have broccoli, you have cabbage. It looks like those are also going to be mulched with straw. And then you have, looks like a cut down cover crop. And then on the middle right, you have in a high tunnel straw in walkways, and then a synthetic material or landscaping fabric for keeping down weeds in the growing rows. And you can see burnt holes, which will be for transplanted or direct seeded crops in the middle. And then on the far right are non-productive spaces such as hedgerows, wildlife plantings, etc. There's a lot of ways that wood chips especially, but other mulches can be used to keep weed pressure down and thus reduce weed and pest pressure on other areas of the farm. And all of those areas can be planned for the purposes of EQIP, of course, as well as for technical assistance on farms. And I wanted to go through a little bit of a refresher on kind of what mulches are recommended for which crops, because it's kind of hard to wrap one's head around that if you're unfamiliar with a small farm. So let the growers, of course, guide you on what they're using already. But when thinking about recommendations, I like to think about what is happening with that crop. What is its habit? How long is it going to be in the field? What is the spacing? And then how is that grower managing residue both when planting and then at the end of that crop's life before turning over the bed to a new crop? So on the left, some examples. Tomatoes, peppers, both of those are typically, almost in all cases, going to be transplanted, especially on larger market farms. And so on the right, the mulch recommended, I'd say, would either be straw, because it being a transplanted crop, you can work with a lot of residue, or using a synthetic material. I love recommending natural materials where possible, and you'll see that that plays a role with EQIP later on, but a lot of growers are using more durable plastic, such as this commercial landscaping fabric as well for weed pressure, and that does have a longer life than the 1-year plastic mulch. Watermelon, that is a crop that is usually spaced far apart and spreads a lot. It may be planted by transplant or by seed, but it being transplanted either with the equipment that it would be transplanted or seeded with, it having a long spacing, I'd probably recommend either landscaping fabric, plastic mulch, but you could also use straw, hay, etc., and manage that residue. Transplanted head lettuce, either leaf mulch, compost, straw, or landscaping fabric. You have a lot of ability to use a lot of different mulches for that. Carrots, beets, spinach, those are all typically direct seeded with really fine spacing, really small spacing, and many rows per bed. And just due to the equipment, it cannot deal typically with high residue amounts, either cover crop or other mulches. So a fine composted leaf mulch would be a good recommendation in that situation. And other pros, cons, and comments on optimal depth, this table will be included in the Excel spreadsheet as well as in a follow-up tech sheet that you can refer to. So going into more of the planning tools on the farm, let's consider an on-farm scenario. So how do we get to the actual amounts applied that we would recommend as part of our technical assistance with the grower? The first step is really to visit that farm, talk with the grower, do what we call a farm inventory. So measuring all of the areas to be mulched on the farm, or talking with the grower on what their spacing and measurements are, their setup for their beds, and then noting that type of mulch per area. Are they using synthetics? Are they using natural? What are they using right now? What do they want to progress towards to build soil health on their farm or to manage weeds more efficiently on their farm? And then taking that, calculating the total material per needed can be a little bit more complicated once we have all those measurements. So we wanted to streamline that as much as possible for you and provide tools that you can use. So let's take an actual example, and some of what I'll say doesn't actually apply to Unity Gardens, but is more of a made-up scenario, so you can see on farm how these different mulch materials apply and the calculator can be used. So in this example, we're really going to focus on the high tunnel and then the field crops or growing beds. So 1 and 2, as noted on this map. And then at the very end, I'll talk more about using this calculator with raised beds or for doing diameter calculations for trees and shrubs as well. But you can see there's a couple of different eye tunnels on this farm. We're going to focus on one of them, and then there are multiple growing rows that are in the field. Narrowing in on those, let's say for the high tunnel, for simplicity's sake, all of the growing beds are managed the same. So they'll all receive the same amount of mulch, the same type of mulch, and the same crop. And we'll come back and touch on the same scenario in crop rotation. So keep this in mind. And then we'll narrow into the growing beds. Let's say that that is broken into 2 different sections. So we have block A being a grouping of 5 beds that are all managed the same, and then block B, which is also a group of 5 beds managed the same. Moving to the high tunnel, narrowing in, let's say there are 6 growing beds in that high tunnel, and we have a 75-foot long high tunnel. A lot of growers use 2.5-foot wide beds or 30-inch beds. And let's say they're going to be growing tomatoes and they want to use straw mulch. They'll be transplanting, they can deal with the high residue. They know they'll have a plan for next year to rake off that straw and use it in walkways or use it elsewhere on the farm or put it back onto a subsequent crop. And then they'll have 5 walkways between those rows, and they want those to be permanent walkways, and they want to better manage weeds in the high tunnel. So they would like to use wood chips on those walkways. Typical spacing is about 18-inch wide or 1.5-foot walkways. Then moving over to the field crops, Again, we have our blocks as 5 beds that are all the same. Let's say a uniform length of 100 foot long, 2.5 foot wide, straw mulch for block A. And again, we want permanent walkways, and we'll do wood chips there. I would not recommend wood chips if, let's say, a grower is not, it does not have permanent walkways or plans to, let's say, in the next year, till those walkways and add those to the growing beds or move around where their growing beds are, because considering carbon to nitrogen ratio, really important to, think about how those wood chips interact with the growing area. And then on block B, we have the only difference being that because of their crop plan, it's best, or the grower wants to plant with compost leaf mulch. So have a finer material on that second group of beds. And what that looks like in the field, this is from a different farm, but think about it in the same scenario. So we have straw on the left, and let's say you've gone out to the farm. You want to know how wide your walkways are, how wide your beds are, and how long your beds are, and then how many of those beds there are total. Another example showing straw on the left. Again, wide, versatility for the straw. I'd say in this situation, probably would have recommended that straw was built up a little bit thicker, because it will decompose over the course of the season, and really want to make sure that it's used well and doing what its purpose was to really reduce weed pressure. So probably would have recommended that go a little bit thicker. You can see that, in this scenario or this situation, grower did not have wood chip walkways. And then with compost on the right, composted leaf mulch, important to remember that recommending soil test or compost analysis both, to ensure that nutrients aren't over applied, and that we are not in conflict with our other standards is really important. So moving to the Excel tool, once you have gone out into the field and worked with your grower to collect their farm inventory, you can put that information into your bed and walkway area calculator. This is just to get the total square footage. And it's also to make sure that we've captured everything that's happening on that farm that applies to mulch. So for your location ID, it's most important to make sure that each area has a unique identifier. So you want to separate to the smallest area that's managed differently on the farm, so that we capture what's happening, in year 1 through however many planned years there are that's happening to that area. So we have it separated by growing areas and by walkways, and each location ID has a separate name. So we have our field block A being the growing beds, field block B, or field block A, W being the walkway. And I think that's a really easy, simple way to keep track of the different areas. And those location IDs can then flow into the farm inventory for other practices. So hopefully really helpful to only capture that information once, and once you have it entered, it just flows through other calculations. And then just to highlight that under the number of beds, that is if there are permanent beds that are all being managed the same. So how many of field block A growing beds are being managed the same? We have our width, we have our length. Excel calculates area for you. You don't have to do that back of the envelope. If you did not have permanent beds, you would just do the number of beds being 1, width being, let's say, it had a 10-foot by 100-foot area that was all being managed the same. Just put that in and calculate area there. Then flowing to our second tab, which is really a grower-focused mulching material calculator that will help you and help the grower know how much of each unit of material do I need to buy and do I need for my whole farm. So the same location ID, this is a drop down that you can select from the previous tab. And then your description, again, growing bed versus walkway, that will auto-populate. And then you can select which material you want to apply. This is from a pre-populated drop-down. For the most common mulching materials, it includes synthetic materials there too, because this is really focused on what does that grower want on their farm, regardless of programs. And then we have a mulch type. So it will auto-populate if you have straw, bales for straw. If you have hay, it will do bales of hay because that is different for calculating the total bales per area. And then you do need to put in the final depth of that material. So I know that I want, or that grower wants really thick wood chips of at least 3 inches in the walkways to make sure they have adequate weed suppression, and only a 1/2 inch of composted leaf mulch, let's say, to not overapply nutrients and to still get that fine seed bed to be able to use planting equipment. Then it'll pop out your units, whether you're doing bales, cubic yards, cubic feet, depending on the source and how that grower wants to apply the material. And an important note for this is that it only will be for 1 year of materials, and then you'll want to copy and paste that same sheet to project for future years, just to have it be a more simplified, streamlined calculator and to be more realistic with how growers are actually applying mulch. For the most part, they're buying it in 1 year increments, at least from the people that we've talked about. A lot of small growers don't have the ability to store multiple bales for multiple years in a clean, dry location. So if that grower does want to project for multiple years and buy in bigger bulk, you can do that. Just copy and paste a different sheet. Then let's move to, okay, what is the total amount of material per type on this farm, and how much is it going to cost that grower? So this will auto sum the amount of square footage per material, again, your units, and the only information that you need to plug in here from working with a grower is the cost per unit. So, depending on the source, this cost per unit could really fluctuate. So in this example, straw cost $5 a bale. Their wood chips they were able to get at a really low cost, $3 per cubic yard. Sometimes that is free for growers that get wood chips delivered. And composted leaf mulch, pretty average price of $35 per cubic yard. Note here that we converted the leaf mulch to cubic yards from cubic feet. And again, that this is for 1 year of materials. You have the total cost per material, and then this sums the entire cost. So for that whole farm, everything that we've looked at thus far for that 1 year is $275.
Hey, Ellie.
Mhm.
We had a question come in. If you could share what the average weight of the straw bale that was used for the calculations, what size?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not, I'll get to it here in another slide. It's not by weight, but more by area. So how much on average a bale of straw versus hay would cover. And just hold on a second until I get to that slide.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Just wanted to clip out this guidance here. So using plant-based materials to add organic matter, provide food and shelter for soil biota, and protect soil surface from raindrop impact and crusting while allowing adequate soil aeration, providing 100% ground coverage. And that could look like different depths for different mulch materials. So refer to that guidance on typical depths per material type. And then there is a note on applying wood chips for minimum of 2-inch depth typically, and then pulling over from other practices not to apply C to N ratio, not to apply mulches with C to N ratios less than 20:1 to water courses. And then the bale calculators do have some assumptions built in, getting to what your question was. And that is an estimate, and know that that could be different based on the source. And really important is to note that the final depth for the bales assumes that the straw and hay material will settle. So let's say you want to put in, as the grower, you want to put in what your final depth is on that bed. I want 2 inches of straw. Going back a couple slides. So this final depth here, I want to have 2 inches in the end, knowing that when you initially apply that bale, it could be, let's say, 6 inches deep. You have it separated. We have the calculator separated by bulk materials versus bales. And cost estimates don't include shipping, transportation, labor. And then just a note on the composted materials as well. So for mulch coverage estimation for straw bale, we estimated the area would be 150 square feet, with a hay bale covering quite a bit more area of 245 square feet. So again, those are based on estimates. From breaking apart bales, hay is typically provides a better weed suppression mat, just due to it kind of being more like spaghetti when it's packed together, and that you can cover a bigger area based on the bale. It would be, I'll need to think about how we'd have the ability to change that calculation if you did want the ability to put in a different bale area square footage in the estimator, but this should be a fairly accurate representation for most farms. And then I guess one way to do that would just be to know, hey, if you know that you can cover for your straw, let's say you're getting round bales versus square bales. If that grower knows that they can cover 300 square feet, maybe to just decrease the number of bales. I'll need to think about that for how we can build in that flexibility into the tool. And now I want to pivot a little bit to talk about programs, which can complicate things a little bit. But this is taken from Practice User Guide, knowing that it can change in future years. But where we're at right now is that there are 2 payment scenarios that could apply for small diversified farms. The payment scenario for small area covers up to approximately half an acre max for that scenario, and that is per material type. So a big reason why we separated compost versus straw versus wood chips is because of economies of scale. So let's say a grower is planning for wood chips to be on an acre of their farm, but straw only on, less than a half an acre. Once you get to that half acre max cutoff per that material type, you would bump that material into the next payment scenario of full coverage. And there is a note in this year's user guide that full coverage can be used to address resource concerns in specialty crop production systems. The scenario we were given also has the unit type as each. So to match other scenarios, other practices, I should say, we are using and we're calculating each on 1,000 square foot basis. So the Excel calculator will account for that and get you to the each or number that you need for planning purposes. And as of fiscal year 23, Indiana's priority is for natural materials only. So synthetics aren't going to be paid on for the purpose of EQIP. However, really important that we want those captured in the grower focus tool because they want to know total for your farm or for their farm, how much they need to buy and apply. So going to the tab for programs, it will pull over the total mulch materials on that farm and then the total areas per year that those mulches are going to be applied. Now, right now, you only have that first year pulling over from that grower tab. And then you'll need to do some conversation and projections on what's going to change, what's going to be the same for those future years, and do additions or subtractions accordingly. So composted leaf mulch, grower knew they wanted to apply it every year. They're going to have decomposition. They're going to have some soil mixing, and they want to be able to make sure they can reapply in subsequent years. Let's say for straw mulch, it's 2375 square feet for the first year, and then bumps down to 1250 for the next year because they do not want to put straw on their high tunnel that second year. And that comes back to their crop plan. And then they do want to go back to using it again, applying it again in that third year. Wood chips, we're not applying it that second year because we know that it will last for those 2 years before decomposition to need to reapply. In this scenario, so here on the right, those numbers 111 for composted leaf mulch, 212 for straw, and 202 for wood chips are those numbers that will be used for EQIP. So that per 1,000 square feet, just taking total area divided by 1,000 and rounding according to normal rules of rounding. So for this scenario, all of the planned materials fit into that natural materials small area scenario. I think I captured everything there. Any questions? I can't see the chat, so please interrupt me.
I've been.
And okay, I do want to acknowledge that there are a lot of complexities when it comes to mulch, and we're still in the process of building those into a functional tool. So an important thing to acknowledge is that many growers are going to be applying, I shouldn't say many, but some growers are going to be applying different kinds of mulch on the exact same beds in the same year. And we want to be able to account for that for the calculator or the log of materials. However, we want to be able to filter out those multiple applications for the purpose of EQIP planning. So that's challenging because we do want to have that flexibility in selecting which of those multiple applications to select or count for EQIP because the material type matters. Let's say if you're doing straw compost in the same year on the same beds on multiple areas of the farm, if you only selected that first application of straw each time, that could easily kick that material into the full coverage scenario over half an acre. Whereas, both of those materials, straw and compost, are both addressing the resource concern. And so you might want to be able to have some nuance in which one to select to keep, let's say, both of those materials within the small acreage scenario. Because for thinking about economies of scale, both would be still fit within that small acreage thought process. So not to confuse things too much or make it too complicated, but just want to acknowledge that we haven't been able to capture that fully into a usable tool. We're in process of that and hope that the tool that we have so far really fulfills a lot of the need for you right now, which with doing the math of area calculations easily, the material type, if there's a single application and being a grower-friendly tool that can help you calculate total material needed on that farm and the cost. And quickly to wrap us up, using the how to use this tool also for calculating diameter. So for tree and shrub plantings, let's say in this example, you wanted to mulch areas around individual orchard trees using 6-foot diameter circles around 5 trees and then 4 diameter circles around 3 shrubs. It's going to try to break all of our brains by doing a quiz to have to calculate that back of the envelope, but decided I wouldn't frustrate us all on a Monday. So let's use the tool for what it's good for and do that math for you quickly. So all you need to know, what is the quantity, what is the description, what's that diameter, and you'll get the area. So for raised beds, let's think about those. In many cases, growers are going to want to put wood chips around their raised beds, but not actually in them. So how do we take that total area, subtract out the raised beds themselves to get the amount for wood chips application? So in this example, the community garden has 5 4x8 raised beds. So you can use the bed and walkway area calculator to calculate and then plan the 160 square feet of mulch for the growing beds. So plan to mulch the walkway areas around the raised beds, and the total area encompassing the walkways and growing beds is 10 by 40 feet. So you enter the total area into this calculator 3. So you need to know the total, which is 10 by 40. So the entire area is 400 square feet. Then using the initial calculator that I introduced with the farm ID, the farm inventories, you would know what is that what is the total growing bed area. And let's say that's 160 square feet. That was calculated by taking those 4x8 raised beds. And then you get the difference. So 400 minus 160, 240 is the difference to be mulched. Hopefully that's clear. And final note is that we are also developing a tech note to accompany for mulches, sharing about the purposes, what are some of those primary purposes as applied to small farms, and considerations such as where to apply different kinds of mulch, C to N ratio, temperature, and duration, etc. That's all I have for you, and want to open it up for questions.
Appreciate it, Ellie. We did have one question come in. Daniel asks, in EQIP, is there a minimum diameter, of mulch required for orchard trees? Sure, if you can speak to that one.
You know, I cannot.
I can address that, Jennifer. Again, great question, Daniel. Again, it comes back to conservation planning. You know, what is the resource concern? And you know, if there's a resource concern around that tree that mulch can help address, then it's the diameter of the resource concern, right? So it really depends on the site, but there is no minimum. The minimum is what's needed to address the resource concern.
Appreciate that, Shannon. Any other questions for Ellie before we switch speakers? And there was some good discussion in the chat about variability in size and weight of straw bales, definitely. Great. Not seeing any more. I'll thank Ellie again, and we'll go ahead with the next section. We're going to have 2 topics with Kara Bergschneider before we break for lunch. So we'll talk low tunnels first, and then irrigation, and then we'll take a break for lunch. Kara?
Thanks, Jennifer. And can you see my slides okay?
Looks great.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. And Happy Monday. Happy to be with you here and talking about the last two topics before we cruise into lunch. First, I'm going to talk about low tunnels and go briefly over a new resource that we've developed for low tunnel systems. So in carrying the farm example forward that Ellie just used in the mulching example, our grower would like to start using low tunnels on their farm in the open field in Block A. So that is that rectangle to the west of the farm that's labeled 1. And so we're working with this producer, and they're interested in low tunnels. So just a reminder that there was a presentation given at a program's weekly meeting on what low tunnels are, how they're typically constructed, and what resource concerns they addressed. This was at the Thursday, February 2nd meeting, and you can see the link to the meeting here on this slide. And also, if you go to your calendar invite for the program's weekly meeting and go to that February 2nd link, it will take you to the presentation. That presentation starts at the 1 hour 57-minute mark, and then it's also located here. Okay, so to help have a conversation with growers about low tunnels and give them an overview of the practice, we've developed this fact sheet. It goes over the purpose of low tunnels and details the benefits as well as the common materials used to construct them. We also have included a further reading section so that if the grower would like to explore more on, say, the benefit of low tunnels or how to construct them, different materials to use, then they can check out these further reading links here. Once the growers decided which area they'd like to use the low tunnel on, so in this case, this rectangular block here in A, then what I would do next is I'd go back into the mulching calculator that Ellie just went over and go into the farm inventory tab and get the square footage of the area. So you can have already used the mulching calculator, like in this example, it's the same farmer and they're doing mulch, so you've been using the mulching calculator, but you can also just bop into that mulching calculator, enter the number of beds, the width of each bed, and the length, and that'll give you your area. And that's really going to help simplify some of this math that we're required to do on these small farms. That's going to give you the amount that you can then use to schedule if you're going into an eQuip application and plug that into the payment estimator. So just a reminder that in order to check out the low tunnel practice, all that's needed is the amount of material that they purchased from manufacturer, a picture of the total amount of planned area under low tunnels at the same time. This can be from the grower, or it can be from a field visit that you did, and an assistance note. So we really hope that that fact sheet helps you give the information, helps you become more comfortable with the practice, but also it gives you a tool to give to the producers that can then empower them to do some research and figure out what low tunnel is going to work best for them. Okay, so that is all I have on low tunnels. And if there are any questions, I can take those while I'm switching over.
keep an eye out here, Kara. I don't see anything yet, but if anybody would like to ask Kara a question before she switches topics, excuse me, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat. I think we're good. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So moving on to irrigation, micro irrigation, and irrigation water management. So again, carrying forward our farm, we're working with this grower, and that in addition to wanting to do cover crops, mulch, and low tunnels, they're also really interested in incorporating some micro irrigation on their farm in one of their high tunnels, and then back in that same that same field area that we were just looking at for low tunnels. So currently, they've been watering with hoses and sprayers the last 4 years. So if they'd like to apply for EQIP, they meet the requirements of having irrigated 2 of the last 5 years. They're already tapped into city water and they want to continue using that water source. There's not a pipeline though bringing water to the western field. So we'd also want to look at scheduling an irrigation pipeline in this conservation plan as well as the micro irrigation. So you can see in this picture on the right, we have the existing pipeline that's going to the high tunnel already, but this western field doesn't have water. They've been dragging hose out there, and we want to help them increase their efficiency by getting some water over there. All right, they've done their research. They know what that they want to use a drip tape for their micro irrigation system. And a drip tape system design would look something like this. This is the most common form of micro irrigation that we use on small farms. So you can expect to get some questions about this system as you're getting out into the field, as the weather turns nice and we're all itching to get away from our desk and get out with people. I think that we're going to have a lot of interest in micro irrigation with our small farms. So that's what it looks like on paper. This is what it looks like in the field. The left-hand side is an open field. Right-hand side, we've got drip irrigation and a high tunnel. And you can see in the high tunnel, right-hand picture, the wet circles where there's a hole punched in the drip tape at each plant, and it's bringing targeted water to each of those plants. The other popular micro irrigation system that you're probably going to have quite a bit of interest in is micro sprinklers that are seen in this picture here. So you've seen this slide in the 201 training, but I wanted to bring this back up because again, as you get back out into the field and are working with these small producers, this is good information to know on why they may be thinking drip tape or going more towards sprinklers. And a lot of small farms, honestly, are going to do both. They're going to have drip tape, but they're also going to have some sprinklers out there, and that's okay. So as we're working with small farmers and they're interested in micro irrigation, I wanted to go over some of the associated practices that you might schedule with that micro irrigation practice. If a producer would like to capture rainwater and use a water catchment system like you see on the right-hand side, from a roof or a high tunnel, then some of the practices that you'd want to be looking at are irrigation reservoir, pumping plant, gutters, and an underground outlet. So this is just trying to consolidate some of those associated practices and get those, in your mind to be thinking about as you're visiting with people. Another scenario you might run into is using water. A grower wants to use water from an existing pond to irrigate. So with this type of system, you'd consider a pumping plant as an associated practice, as well as irrigation pipeline. So this summer, the micro irrigation team is going to be working on creating templates for these micro irrigation systems. We're doing that so that our tech teams don't need to recreate the wheel with each of these systems. And as we finish them, we'll be providing training. Our goal is to have them to you by the end of the summer so that you're in good shape for EQIP 2024. As some of you may have already discovered, and some of you will as you start working with customers that are interested in micro irrigation, in order to plan the micro irrigation practice, we have to have an irrigation water management plan. It's required by both the Conservation Practice Standard, general criteria, and then our Practice Users Guide. That CPS general criteria cannot be changed. So we needed to figure out a way to be able to get irrigation water management plans to these producers in a timely and simplified manner. Our challenge lies in that we don't have any TSPs in Indiana to write these plans. So what the irrigation team has done is created a template irrigation water management plan that a producer can use. This is a look at the first 2 pages of the template plan. The plan guides a producer through how to determine the volume, frequency, and application rate of water. And it gives the producer 3 different options for determining irrigation needs. The plan is 7 pages long, with the first 5 pages giving information, and then the last 2 pages will need to be completed by the grower and planner, and that's these 2 pages here. This documents the information such as water source, type of irrigation, and the crops that are going to be grown. This last page where it says attach site plan map is a map of the irrigation area, and this can be hand drawn in or brought in from CD. This is just a very general map. It doesn't have to be detailed. That's going to come with the design of the system. So this does not have to be real detailed here. So we have to have an irrigation water management plan for scheduling micro irrigation EQIP. However, I wanted to make you aware of the documentation requirements if irrigation water management is planned in EQIP and put into a contract. As you can see here from the Practice Users Guide, in order for 449 to be checked out, the producer would need to provide detailed information on records of soil moisture, crop water use, rainfall amount, if that's applicable, if it's in the field, irrigation timing, and amounts that were applied. And I wanted to mention this because these requirements may not be for every grower. This is some pretty serious record keeping. So I'm not dissuading you from offering irrigation water management as a practice to growers. I just want you and the producer that you're working with to be aware of these document requirements so they know what they're getting themselves into. As you work with growers that are interested in more irrigation, I'm bringing this slide back up from the 201 training because this is such great information that can really help a grower research what system is going to work best for them. Okay, Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Jennifer, how we doing on chat?
We have a few questions pop in. So,
Okay.
Kara, thank you again for presenting on both of those topics. I'm going to go ahead and read through the questions as they come in. We have several, but I'll read one and then pause to let you answer, and then we'll move on to the next.
Okay.
So Allison Showfast asks, could a grower meet the practice standard if they purchased a different type of material of low tunnel and they are using it at different times of the year? In this scenario, we wouldn't have a picture of the entire contracted area covered at one time. However, the square feet they purchase would equal the contracted amount, and the entire contracted area would be covered by the end of the year. And she says, hope that makes sense.
I'm going back and reading it.
Sure.
So if a grower... Okay, I see. So the scenario is that there's two different types of material that's purchased, and they're using it at different times. So for example, you have like a thick spun woven material because you want to extend your growing season, but then you've also got like some insect netting that you plan on using in summertime for pest exclusion. So I would say in that scenario where it's visually very obvious to see that the different types of material, that you could do that as long as the pictures that are taken are not of the same area. And I know you know that, Allison, but just reminding everyone that the low tunnels have to be used on different areas. So you couldn't have two different types of material that's used on the same area. That wouldn't be okay. But if they're on different areas, that's fine. Just something as a planner to consider, and that the grower knows up front, is that we couldn't make a payment on that total low tunnel area until we had, so say that they were doing like winter extension, or sorry, spring extension by doing the thick spun fabric. And so they have that on there. They put it on in December, and they have it on there till March, but they're not using that mesh netting, insect netting, until June. Well, they couldn't get their payment until we had proof that they had applied it on two different areas. So they would have to wait until June to get their payment.
Appreciate that. Thank you for working through that question and providing that answer. And certainly, Allison, if that doesn't address it, or if you had a follow-up question, please feel free to chime in. But in the meantime, I'll go ahead and proceed through the rest of the questions. Don asks, are Oya watering pots an option for some small operations in Indiana, or is that more of a dry climate system?
So Don, if you don't mind just popping on there, taking your mic off. What is an Oya watering pot? Is that the clay pot? Is that what I'm thinking of? And I may have to get back with you on that and look up that information. Our irrigation reservoirs are very, very flexible. So I'll look up the Oya watering pot and see if that would meet or not, and send it out to everyone.
Thanks, Kara. Jason Connor, I'm going to put you on the spot for a second, if you don't mind. Jason had asked the question. He says, maybe you've covered this, but what is the lifespan of these micro irrigation systems? And then he just says, oops, I saw it on the user guide. Would you mind popping in and sharing that with the group, Jason? You might not be available to do that just yet, but it is in the practice user guide. So a heads up to others who might be wondering. And then Jenny asked the question, what about getting water to the high tunnel, watering facility or hydrant, or running pipeline from well to a micro irrigation system? And Scott chimed in with a response about the reminder of the availability of irrigation pipeline practice code 430.
Oh, perfect. Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. Thanks,
Awesome.
Scott.
And then Jennifer Kipper asks, says, so for 441, they would need the fact sheet plan for a 449 irrigation water management plan. But we would only pay for 449, pay on 449 if they're willing to do the record keeping, correct? And Scott chimed in again to say correct.
Yeah, great.
So I'm going to pause for a minute to see if there's any other comments or questions that folks want to ask before we break for lunch. I know that might be a loaded question, but good questions have come in so far on these topics. Appreciate it. Oh, we did have another one. Kara, just to let you know, Allison commented your response made sense, and she says thank you.
Oh,
and
great.
then Lee Schnell asked the question. He says, is there a list of IPM consultants for vegetable crops, small acreages our customers can access? This would be more CTA and not necessarily program IPM plans.
If Tony Bailey is on, then he might be able to chime in here. Lee, that's such a great question. And I have done some calling on TSPs, so not consultants, but pest management or TSPs who do IPMs, and have not yet found someone who works on these small scale operations. So that is a great question. I think it's a huge need that we have on where to direct people. We have Purdue Extension, of course, which is always a great resource, but it is on our list of things to look into and get some more information out if it's possible. I'm not sure it is yet, but I am going to dive into it this summer and look and see if there's like a list we could develop, or work with Purdue to develop that list for these small growers, because it is a need.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Kara. And oh, go ahead,
yeah.
Tony.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I agree. Unfortunately, we've not had that interest from TSPs that want to provide that sort of service. I think as we've talked about numerous times with urban ag small farm, that niche is just missing. We've been trying to identify it to some of our larger cooperatives and different things like that, because I think there's a niche of a service that could be provided by them if they wanted to. But that is, we talked about it with nutrient management, soil fertility as well. I saw in there that Ruth also mentioned reminders about from Extension, and there's various things. I think there's a vegetable hotline. Even some of the things from the field crops, pest and crops newsletters that go out there, some of those weekly type of newsletters that come out to help spur people to think about scouting for something. Hey, I'm seeing this in southern Indiana. I need to start watching for it in central Indiana because it might become a problem there, whether it's insects, disease, or weeds, or whatever the case might be.
Thanks, Tony. And you're right, Ruth did chime in on the chat. And then it looks like Willem Drews provided a link or an email for the Southwest Purdue Ag Center plant pathologist, Dan Eagle. So again, just a good reference there. There was another question that popped in, and it was asked and answered, I believe, but I would not go ahead and communicate it here on the recording. Jenny Hilt asked a follow-up question with regards to the kind of the irrigation question, asking if installing a hydrant is okay through EQIP. And Scott Wagner chimed in to say installing a hydrant is applicable in the irrigation standards. And then Jenny responds as well to say, pardon my ignorance, of course, micro irrigation pipeline can be ran directly from a well, similar to livestock pipeline. So she's kind of asking if the 430 code for irrigation pipeline can be run directly from a well, much like we do for livestock pipeline.
Yes, it can be. is very similar to livestock pipeline, Jenny. And one of the things we'll be working on with these design templates is our items like when you have a irrigation line that's being run directly from a well, you want to make sure that you have a backflow valve on there so that if people are doing fertigation, then those nutrients aren't getting back into the well, or any sort of pesticides also. So yes, it can be run directly from the well, but there are some requirements that we have to make sure that we're keeping our water clean.
Excellent. Thank you for those comments and for all the good questions. Go ahead and wrap up here. See, we're about right on time. We have about 30 minutes scheduled for lunch, and I'll go ahead and put up a timer so that folks know when that time starts and when we'll plan to pick back off in the afternoon. But before I do that, I see Shannon has his hand up. Shannon?
And just a note to everyone, I'm going to stop the recording so that we'll have kind of a good break for anyone that needs to take it, and then we'll start the recording back up right after lunch. Thank you.
Perfect. So, yep, I'll go ahead and share my clock here. Like I said, we'll go ahead and take a 30-minute break, and then when we come back from lunch, we're going to hear about crop rotations from Amanda Counts. So we'll be ready for that.